So officially, that clock up there is 2 hours slow. So if you want to know what time it is, I don't know how long it'll stay in that position, because I don't think it started off being 2 hours slow. Whenever we get a tall person that wants to try to get that down and not drop it and kill somebody like I've done before, and like Ricky's done before, then go for it, and we'll give you a quarter. If you can reach out the window there and pull it away from the wall and get it down and fix it, or maybe even before we fix it, to the right time, put a new battery in it. That might be the benefit. But it's not right now for some reason. And even with the changes from daylight saving time and all, I don't think you could ever get it where it's 2 hours off. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you could. That's a good problem for a math major in here that wants to figure out if you can do that or not. We'd benefit that. Certainly glad to see everybody here. This is, of course, the last Sunday of the year. And I thought it'd be good for us to go back and to think about some things that have occurred over the last few years that we maybe have moved away from even contemplating it, although I'm sure that when we begin to look at this particular subject, then you're going to be brought to remembrance. One of the words that was examined this morning on Good News Today by David Smith, remembering, and of course his basis for that, of course, was Revelation chapter 2, remember from whence thou art fallen and repent. You know, of course, that's the idea from the church at Ephesus there, and the first of those 7 congregations that are addressed by the Lord in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. And so when we start to remember, then we'll see what we're going to be trying to get at here and draw some conclusions from, and maybe do as good a job as we can of recognizing the priority of a certain type of health. And of course, I'm going to tell you that it's not physical health. And while we do have a responsibility to take care of ourselves and take our vitamins and brush our teeth and have regular checkups and all such things as that, and if you've got a knot growing out of the side of your head, you probably need to go see what it is before people start laughing at you and pointing and all. You better do something like that. But keep in mind, let's go back just a few short years when there was something called a pandemic that was threatening us. Now, I don't even think I'd ever considered that word pandemic until we first heard it back there towards the end of 2019 and then headed into 2020. Then there was a whole lot said about the pandemic that was taking over the world. There's a whole lot of argumentation that ensued relative to what was the source of it. And of course, as is often the case, we were lied to as to what the source was. Somebody was not eating bat stew over in China, and it came from a wet market where they sell bats on the open market. That's not where it came from. It actually came by virtue of our tax money funding a place where they were trying to get viruses to be more communicable. And lo and behold, the whole world ends up suffering for that. And so it's you and me that are to blame for it, because our tax money went there and we put the people in power who made that happen. Even though it was against the law, well, that don't matter. If you're in power, the law doesn't matter that much. And so what happened to the world was the direct result of somebody thinking they could play God and somehow get a one-up on people and be prepared to try to wipe out everybody that wasn't like them through some type of disease that there was no cure for. And they did a pretty good job. And you remember what happened. Meeting virtually, had you ever imagined there would be something even said like that? Virtual meeting became the norm in many congregations. And there was a whole lot of hand-wringing and a whole lot of consternation, a whole lot of trying to figure out, well, what are we supposed to do? We've never faced anything like this, and most congregations' leadership had never faced that before because nobody had, and so we're trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to handle this. And we're getting specific instructions from people that we've always thought that we could turn to give us some guidance, and then you start thinking, well, maybe they're not telling us and guiding us in the right way. Maybe there's some ulterior motive here involved in this or whatever. And so we tried to follow the rules and tried to apply the rules the best that we could and tried to use a little bit of common sense as to dealing with this problem. And of course, one of the ways was don't meet, preacher stands in the pulpit, 2 or 3 people's here, and then everybody meets at home. And then there were gathering protocols that were established by the federal government. And while there was some leeway that some local municipalities could use, then they were in jeopardy of losing federal funding if they didn't go along with what the orders from headquarters in Washington, D.C. said. And so if you were trying to go into a place like a open air market, say, and buy vegetables, then that was off base. You couldn't do it. Now, you go to Walmart, but you went to Walmart, you had to wear a mask, and you had to follow the X's on the floor and make sure you didn't get close to nobody. All those things were part of it. Classes were suspended in many congregations. I mean, if we can't get together to eat the Lord's Supper together, then we're not going to spend our time getting together and have classes. And even chairs were rearranged in various congregations to keep proper distancing. Of course, when you got pews, then you got to have open pews. You can't have everybody sitting right like y'all are now because that would spread. And we started using sanitary individualized cups and bread. That became a normal thing. Somebody made a whole lot of money masquerading a little piece of styrofoam as if it was unleavened bread. I never did see the chemical makeup of that stuff, but I just don't believe that was probably what is prescribed for eating in the Lord's Supper. And we did this, why? Because we did not want a disease to infect us or others. That's why we did it. We were told that if we did this, then this would allow us to live through safely this pandemic that was of human origin. Now, would it surprise you if I told you that this past week I looked on the CDC website and the statistics are in that the COVID vaccine had no impact whatsoever on whether you got COVID or whether you went to the hospital? None. So it didn't have any say-so whether you died or not. And we know from the very beginning that people were going in the hospital, they'd automatically be put on a ventilator, and that was their death sentence. And those that refused to be put on a ventilator, they end up surviving. So obviously amateurs were in charge, and here we were, gullible sheep, swallowing everything as if this is from on high, it's from God himself, telling us what to do. And if we didn't learn a lesson from that, then there ain't no way we're ever going to learn a lesson. Just because people are in a position of power, you do not swallow what they say, hook, line, and sinker. That doesn't go for, we say it all the time from this pulpit, don't believe anything I say. Don't believe anything me and Tony agree on. Go to the Bible and see what the truth is. And we have not been doing that as a nation for far too long. And that showed it because of all these things that happened. And all the jobs that were lost, and all the military men that were kicked out of the military, and all the nurses that lost their job because they refused to take the jab. All those things happened because Big Brother supposedly knew better than regular old average common sense people. Well, guess what? They didn't. They've been exposed. And it's going to take a long time before they are considered trustworthy ever again. And that's the whole system, folks. And anybody that bucked it, it's amazing how you'll never hear their name because they've been canceled. They've been removed from any type of voice of opposition to anything. They were kicked off of every social media platform. They lost their jobs. They were kicked out of hospitals. Somebody just recently had the audacity to let it be known that in a Houston hospital, they'd been doing sex transformations on kids. And what they do to the guy that exposed it, they fired him and sued him. That's what they did. They were doing the exact same thing in Vanderbilt University. 12-year-old girls were having their breasts removed so they could be boys. And when the light came out, and when an actual video showing what went on in one of those meetings that they had, and the person up there that was promoting this transsexualism for kids said, this is a real moneymaker. If we get them started on puberty blockers, we've got them the rest of their life. And that was coming from the mouth of a woman who's saying, if you don't believe in this, then you need to find you another job. We shut that down. The state of Tennessee did, and it was sustained by the United States Supreme Court just in the last 2 weeks, thankfully. But somebody had to say, this ain't right. And that's what we've been trying to do all these years. When it comes to what the Bible teaches, when it comes to the objective nature of truth, then we've said, listen, let's go back to the source of truth. Let's go back to reality, to the way things really are. And if we go to things that are reality and the way things actually are, truth, then upon that basis, then we can move forward. But until we get there, we ain't going to agree on nothing. It's simply not going to happen. So we know all that happened. There's no doubt about it. But would it surprise you that we spent all that time trying to make sure that we didn't die physically, but so many times we pay little attention whatsoever to dying spiritually? There's a greater disease than COVID or COVID-2 or COVID-3 or COVID triple. It doesn't matter whatever comes along the pipe. Bird flu, monkeypox, whatever it is. There's something far worse than that, and that's the loss of the soul. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, you know this passage well. Jesus said, fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Sounds like to me that the priority that Jesus is talking about here is not being that concerned about people canceling you, even canceling you permanently from this earth, even taking your life. What else can they do? That's all they can do. They can cease you from being able to breathe. They can throw you in the pen. They can even sentence you to being hanged until you're dead. But that's all they can do. And in many instances, they are simply helping us out, get to a world that's a whole lot better than this one is anyhow. In the Hadean realm where we can be with Lazarus, who was comforted in Abraham's bosom. So that's not a bad thing at all, is it? Spiritual diseases are more deadly than physical diseases. What is the disease then that we should fear? Now there's probably a whole lot of different ones we could think about, but I submit that this is the most basic one there is. And this has been talked about a long time before me. As a matter of fact, you can go all the way back to Nazi Germany, and there was a fellow by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer who had the audacity as a Catholic theologian to stand against the annihilation of the Jewish race, and so he ended up dying in a concentration camp himself. All he had to do is keep his mouth shut. I mean, he wasn't being killed. He was a white Anglo-Saxon with German blood. He had it an easy way. All he had to do was just keep his mouth shut. He couldn't do it. He could not keep his mouth shut. And so he ends up being exterminated himself when he's trying to raise opposition to Nazism and the extermination of the Jewish race. But in some of his writings, he used this terminology. He said the disease that we're going to be talking about here for a few minutes was the result of cheap grace. Now, rest assured, if you're talking about grace, you're talking about a